Okay, thank you everyone for participating in today's One House seminar. Today our topic will be remote consent and electronic data capture. And as you guys all know, after the COVID-19 pandemic, how we conduct human subject research has been dramatically impacted. And regarding to the center guideline, we're supposed to have minimal contact with the subject and get the research procedure started the moment the subject get on site. So how to get those paperwork done prior to the visit and how to maintain the research data more effectively to streamline the workflow and maintain the productivity of the human subject research is of great interest right now. So we started hosting this new topic in the One House seminar. And today we have not one, not two, but three speakers. So to cover this topic. And the first speaker is Lynn Simpson, and she's the senior manager at the partners research application teams. And her team help coordinate and support faculty and research study staff in their electronic data capture and web-based survey and application needs for research studies. And we're very lucky to have her today. And the second speaker today is Rowan Staley from the Staley lab and the Neurointestinal Health Center. And she is currently involved in a few different projects. And one is studying the effects of vagus nerve stimulation on the GI mortality and the CNS through combined brain and gut FMI. And another study studying the efficacy of cognitive behavior therapy in the treatment of gastroparesis. And today she'll give us a step-by-step live demo of how to use Redcap EConsent. Last but not the least, our third speaker is Kassandra, and she's also from Nepal lab, and she's currently working on migraine and mindfulness study at the Nepal lab. And today she will cover a very different tool called the StudyTalks and how that helped her in her research. So without further ado, let's get it started. So Lynn, can you unmute yourself and take it away? Oh, for the participants, if you have any questions, feel free to text your question in the Q&A box and we will answer these questions in the end of the presentation. So stay tuned, okay?
All right, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be here and talk about our research applications team and specifically Redcap. So I manage, let's see, how do I advance this? Okay, there we go. So I manage the research information science and computing risk research applications. I'll give a little bit overview of that. Talk about Redcap in general, and then dive into a Redcap EConsent overview, because it's a really new hot topic that COVID has made us be very aware of. So research information science and computing, the application team that we support is primarily Redcap, and that's a no-cost solution available to researchers. Lab Archives, which is the electronic notebook, which is also available at no cost. FreezerWorks, which is a sample management, and that's vendor-based, and GitLab, which is like a code-based or source-based repository, and that's also at no cost. So we're really trying to support electronic means and ways to work in our remote environment, and these are all available for researchers to use. And there's more information on our website, rc.partners.org, and then my team is edcsupport@partners.org. So what is Redcap? Redcap stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. It's been at MGB for about 10 years now. And we license this application directly from Vanderbilt University. So it's not a MGB developed application. It's actually a Vanderbilt academic program. And we purchase it, we license it at no cost. And then that's how we're able to support it through funding from Harvard Catalyst Solution and also Mass General Brigham. We also host all the data here, and we comply with all partners' research, IS, and information security standards. So we take care of all of that. And then you're really accessing the application through the web So it's not PC or Mac dependent, it's compatible. And you don't need to access it through VPN. You can access it directly through your web browser. So here's the concept of Redcap is really, it's like a self-service. You are totally in control of shaping your database, your project build, your surveys. And so you're defining your question types, your validation types, any calculations, branching logic. And so you're really driving the development of your project and the data that you need to capture. And then within that, there's really no limit to the number of projects. There's no limit to the number of questionnaires you can have within a project. And then there is some administration right from our team. Once you do launch your project and start collecting real data, we want to make sure that you're collecting data and you're not overriding or corrupting any data. So we do some mid-study change control, and that just helps you maintain really clean, really accurate data. So we help on that too. So most people ask, well, you know, what is the support model, or how do we get started? This is a need. We are actually under-resourced right now because of COVID and the hiring freeze. So we really have one full-time person dedicated to support all of the institution. And so we really are trying to pump out a lot of the self-service module. There's a help and FAQ within the application. There's a getting started website. There's a lot of video tutorials out there. So we're trying to pump out as much knowledge-based materials to you as possible so you can access it, learn it, and optimize your builds. But do you have to know a lot of programming? And the answer really is not necessarily, because a lot of it's through the user interface, and it's very much step-by-step and talks you through the process. So when you want to create Redcap, so most people use Redcap for things like form collection. So if you have a questionnaire that you're collecting on paper, you could basically translate that into a Redcap questionnaire. If you're collecting surveys, you can translate that into a Redcap questionnaire and a Redcap survey. And so when you create a new project or you have a new idea for a database or a form collection, you request a new project, and the project setup page will walk you through your project settings. So do you want to use surveys? Do you have longitudinal data collection? The design of your forms, and then optional modules and custom features that you would enable based on what your project needs are. And then within the designing your forms, you're really looking at instrument design. It's a pop-up here, and it asks you what field type you want to add. So the standard field types you see on any web-based form, text fields, radio buttons, checkboxes. There's a field label. If you have choices, it'll ask for your choices. Here's the value of these EDC tools, anything from Redcap to a StudyTalks, is that it bridges the gap between collecting data electronically and what those field labels and what a person entering data, whether it be a participant or a research coordinator, they're entering in data based on kind of this field label question answers. But behind the scenes, you're coding that data with variable names and code choices. So that way the data goes in, it can be easily exported and analyzed in a clean format, a coded format. And so that's really been bridging the gap for a lot of our groups that are used to using paper forms, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, then they try to analyze it in Excel, they're doing a lot of cleanup, and then there's these iterations of Excel spreadsheets. And what we're really trying to do with these tools is allow you to collect that data in a clean way, export it out, and start analyzing it right away to eliminate that middle step. That's really the value add for using a tool like Redcap or StudyTalks. Once you get that build going, there's really two ways that you're entering data into Redcap. And the first one really is data entry access. So you logged into redcap.partners.org with your MGB username and password, and then you have access to your project, and you can grant other people access to your project. If it's a multi-site study, you can actually grant external sites access to that same project and limit their access specific to their site data. And then all that data goes into one project. And then here you can see what the data entry looks like on the left. Then you could take that same form, or you could take a different form, and you can turn that into a survey. And what that allows the system to do is create a specific URL for that survey. And then you can use, if it's the public survey, you can post that survey anywhere or send it in any email. People click on it, they see the survey access, which is just a more limited view, but it's basically the same data and the same form. And then data that's entered into that goes right back into your project. So that's really the two ways that you can enter data. And in one project, you can have multiple combinations. You can have data that you want to collect about a participant, then you could have surveys that the participant enters directly. And so that all gets combined in their same record. So it's a data collection tool, but then there are some data management tools. And so the big thing is once you get the data in, what do you do with it? And so here, Redcap allows you to export it in many different formats. So you can export it in Excel, which a lot of us are used to working with, or you can directly export the raw data and the syntax into SPSS, SAS, R, or Stata. And actually, we just ran some metrics for the year, and we're seeing a lot more people are using the API, which is an application programmable interface. It's the ability to import and export data programmatically. So they're able to be in R or be in SAS and pull data out directly while they're in that application, run some analysis, and then even push some flags or some data back into Redcap. So we're seeing a lot more interoperability there between these types of stats tools and the data that's in the database. We also have a data import tool. So we always get the question, well, I have all this data already. I have it in spreadsheets. Can I transition that into Redcap? And yes, that's possible. Or if you're getting data feeds from a source, you can program the Redcap project to be able to import that data. So you do have to build it out. So if you have a spreadsheet, you would still build out the fields in Redcap, and then you're able to import it in using a CSV file. There's a lot of different tools, and I'm happy to go into all of these, but really at a high level, there's more than just data collection. There's the reports, the data import. There's a lot of audit trails and logging that we have to have now, and that's also freely available, file repository, locking management systems. So a lot of good things to investigate there. I think what's the most exciting for me, as I've been in this position for 10 years, is more not just having Redcap be standalone, but actually try to work with other groups and streamline research processes. So we're working a lot with the quality improvement program. So if you're doing clinical research or human research studies, we are trying to make sure we have that regulatory binder in some state, because that also has gone electronic. We put it in Dropbox folders or we put it in lab archives. But really what we're focused on this quarter is the delegation log, because that requires signatures, staff signatures, PI signatures on the log. So we're looking for a solution there. We are in the very early stages of being able to work with the RPDR team and get data directly from Epic and get data feeds from RPDR. We had some tools there that we did some early on pilots with Ready. I think some people may have used that in the Martinos Center, but really we're really focused on trying to integrate Redcap more into that data flow process. Because if you need data, you get it from RPDR and Epic. If you need a place to put it, typically you're trying to put it in something like Redcap or another EDC tool. EConsent I'm going to talk about, but we have a lot of other projects going on. So if you're interested or have ideas of how to integrate Redcap with other things, we're always open for collaboration. So the EConsent project came about because COVID, and obviously we had to kind of rethink how we were going to collect our consent. And some of our projects paused, but a lot of other projects had to just like really quickly get up to speed in an electronic world and a remote consent world. And so that's where we really scrambled. And through multiple iterations starting in May through July, I think we're at a pretty good state now. And trial and error and just working through this process, we've developed a template so that way we can help our researchers with their informed consent process. And we did validate this process. So if you're working on FDA regulated trials, there is a regulation for electronic source and electronic signatures, and that's 21 CFR Part 11. And most of that requires validation. So the project validation we took care of on the REDCap EConsent side. So we have all that documentation in place. This isn't we're still working in general for REDCap being Part 11 compliant, but we're not there for every project. It's really just right now for the EConsent project. We have a ton of information on our website and more how-tos and information about the compliance status. So the workflow, the use cases were originally prior to COVID, we were thinking about, and we had a workflow where you could approach people in person with an iPad and display the informed consent form, and everybody there just signed off on that. Well, that use case is taken kind of a backseat to the second use case, which is everybody's remote. There's a phone call or a Zoom meeting, and everybody gets emailed a REDCap survey with their consent signature and their consent components in it. Everybody signs it, and then it creates that final e-consent. And then the third use case is that there's not a study team involved. Sometimes it's just a online consent where you've been asked or invited to a study, and then you just click on the survey and complete that. And those are more for minimal risk. And then also we've had the MGB Protect study, which I actually consented into, use this process where they emailed corporate and then invited you to a study, and then you could read about it online, sign off on it. And that was all without people. So there's multiple use cases we're trying to cover. And then inside of those use cases, we're also very aware that there's pediatric studies with a sense. And so there's multiple types of consents within a consent process. And then non-English speakers, we are working with multilingual forms, and we're working with the short forms and those versions of the e-consent process. So what does it look like? And I'm going to touch on this high level because I know Rowan is going to really go into this more, but we take that stamped approved consent PDF and we embed it into a REDCap survey. So the participant sees that stamped version, and then we add in the survey fields or the signature fields, and we add in any questions that are actually in that consent form. The participant is emailed that, they are able to review and sign it. Study staff and if there's interpreters involved or witnesses, they receive separate REDCap surveys. Once that all comes together, we run what we call a paper trail, which is a process in REDCap that combines all of those surveys together into one final PDF. And so you can see here in REDCap, there's multiple forms that are survey versions. So you can have participant and consent information, which is entered by the study team, multiple surveys, but if you don't have interpreters or witnesses, you don't need those forms, the signed consent copy, and then we threw in, for this specific one, we threw in continuation of consent, not always needed, and then a consent tracker. So then at the end, the signed consent copy is also emailed. And so we worked really closely with the IRB and we worked really closely with the QI team on this entire process. One feature that for those that are using REDCap or are thinking about using REDCap that I find very helpful is that it's relatively new, it's an alerts and notification. So if you want to know when data is being entered, if there's a specific condition or there's a specific question, if it gets answered a certain way, you want to be notified. Study staff team can be notified with an alert, an email alert. And the other thing is that we've automated a lot of the e-consent process with the alerts and notifications. So once the participant signs the form, then we automatically email the study staff to sign their component. And then once the whole thing is PDF together, then we automated the process to send that back to the participant. So we're trying to get this process burden off of the research staff and more onto a REDCap process and workflow. So that is a high-level overview. Again, we have a user group session, so we are in the process of upgrading Redcap to version 10, and there's some exciting features in there. So we actually are having a user group session Friday, November 13th, and please register and come to that one. That's going to be our first ever virtual user group session, so it should be interesting. And then to access Redcap, it's redcap.partners.org. You can log in with your MGE username and password, the getting started materials, and all of our resources in one deck.
Awesome. Thank you so much for presentation. We have a few questions in the Q&A box, and stay tuned. We're going to answer these all together in the end of the presentation. So now we're going to pass the talk to Rowan, so she'll guide us through a real live demo of how you can do EConsent using Redcap. Rowan, you can unmute yourself and take it away.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Rowan. I'm a CRC2 under Dr. Vitaly Napadow at the Martinos Center. And I'm just going to go ahead and give a big shout out both to Ben for putting this together and also for Lynn, because she was instrumental in our lab's process of setting up these EConsent modules over the summer once we were allowed to begin research again. And I know she said that their staff is under a lot of stress in terms of workload, but I can also just attest that they've been extremely responsive every time I've reached out to them and really are very, very helpful with any kind of smaller questions I had in putting this together. So I just wanted to do a very brief overview of why we use Redcap for our lab and specifically for my studies. It's been really helpful that it's a web-based application because people can use any browser and they can access it from anywhere. So all we need to have them have is Wi-Fi, basically, and that's been really helpful in terms of making this process as easy as possible. In our lab, we do also use Redcap with some of its more basic applications, like sending patient surveys or questionnaires. And in my experience, it's been a very easy way to collect data, and also the exportation process is very smooth and it's very easily workable, and it can take, we have some of our studies that use this Redcap questionnaires and then some of our studies where we do paper questionnaires, and it definitely takes less time to have everything be online from the start. And then finally, I'm specifically going to talk about the EConsent module that Lynn mentioned in her PowerPoint, because that is something that I think has been the one of the biggest changes with COVID-19 in terms of one of our initial visits going remote. So our screening visit was typically done on the main campus of MGH, actually at a GI clinic. The type of imaging we do is typically with functional GI disordered patients. And so we get a lot of our patients from the GI motility clinic at MGH. And so this visit used to be an in-person so that our study doctor could meet the subjects and do a brief physical exam with them. But ever since COVID-19 hit in early March and we were able to restart research around June and July, we ended up making this visit remote, and we found that it eases a lot of our subjects' worries about going to the main campus of MGH, and our other visits are at the Martinos Center, and people have been typically more willing to come to the Martinos Center for our imaging visits. So I'm going to go ahead and give a live demonstration of what using the Redcap EConsent module looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and share my other screen and we'll get this started. So this is one of the kind of beginning images for one of our actual studies. And I'm going to be very careful not to show any PHI. So there's going to be some buttons that I can't click, but you'll definitely get a sense of the process. I do just want to kind of emphasize how easy I find this to be. The very first thing when you have a subject is you can go ahead and put in whatever their study identification is, and then you just press enter and it brings you to this. And we have a pretty basic setup for our consent process for these studies. You can see we don't have what Lynn showed as kind of the witness or an interpreter or any of those forms. We kept ours as straightforward as possible. So the very first thing that you would do is just click here on participant and consent information. And this very first thing is just getting their brief information, and they're going to use this to then from their end sign into a portal. At this point, typically with subjects, I am speaking with them over the phone because we opted to do a phone screening visit as opposed to a Zoom visit because we wanted to avoid any home visit implications. And we found that phone visits work quite well so far. So you're just going to go ahead and enter their basic information. Down here is where you would click on the investigators to obtain consent. For our studies, we require a study doctor to obtain consent. So at this point, I'm typically on the phone using my Jabber number, communicating with the subject, and then I would merge Dr. Kuo, he's a neurogastroenterologist on main campus, into the call, and he's familiar with the consent forms, of course. And then this is normally where if I was talking to a subject, I would fill in Dr. Kuo's email, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to fill in my own. So I'll be getting the emails for both the subject and, in this case, the consenter. And you just go ahead and click these buttons and then complete. And as soon as you hit the complete button for this survey, it will automatically trigger an email to your subject for them to open a link on their computer. So we can go ahead and shift over to my email, and sometimes these take a few seconds to come through. So we'll just wait a little bit. As I said, typically at this point, I'm on the phone with the subject and have reviewed brief inclusion-exclusion criteria. I've walked them through what we're doing today. You can go ahead and see here what is going to be displayed. So it says EConsent for research study. And in that alerts and notification section that Lynn reviewed, you can actually go and create your own email template for people. We kept ours pretty general. So this is what's going to pop up for the subject in their email, and then they just click on this link here, and it's going to take them to a sign-in page where they are going to have to enter their birth date as we've entered right before. Gonna make sure I typed that incorrectly. Yes. And if they don't do this correctly, or if they enter in an incorrect format, it'll just pop up with a little help notification that directs them to my email and phone number. So at this point, they're going to sign in, and you can see here at the top, it walks them through the study name, the description of the study population, and basically at any point in this process, we're gonna have some information about who to contact if anything goes wrong. And this is where you see the embedded PDF that Lynn spoke of. So this is just our most recent consent form for our study. It's about 13 pages long. So at this point, Dr. Kuo and the subject are speaking with each other, and they are reviewing this consent form together. So Dr. Kuo would have this up on his computer as well. Dr. Kuo can answer any questions that the subject has, and at the very end, it just scrolls down to here. And this is where the subject would add their signature. And this is a very easy process. Typically, we ask our subjects to do this on the computer, but we think that can be done on the phone as well. And then they just put now for the time, and then they're going to click submit. They ask to kind of review, you click submit again. And then it just takes you to this close survey end page here up at the top. And so we are just gonna go ahead and switch back to here. And shortly you will see, as soon as we kind of give this a chance to refresh, that it's going to pop up as the research consent form having been filled in. And Lynn also mentioned this kind of automatic email setup, and I'm sure for any research coordinators who are listening, they know that anything that can be automated in terms of email, the better, because we send so many emails to our subjects per day. And so as soon as this is hit complete and submitted, it's going to trigger an automatic email to whoever is doing the consent. So typically this would be Dr. Quo. And we're just going to go ahead and wait for this to come through on my end so I can show you what it would look like from the consenter's perspective. Obviously, depending on the study, as a study coordinator, you could be able to do consent, or you need like a physician investigator or nurse practitioner. We can like moderate exactly what the automatic notifications are, and something that I've found to be particularly helpful, especially because our consent is done by our study doctor and not by myself, is that we can go ahead and check and see exactly when the email was sent and if it was sent okay. So that can be really helpful, especially if there's a bit of a lag, or at this point, typically the study doctor has signed off of the call and continued to see patients in his clinic. And so if there's ever a lag, I can kind of see what email was sent. If I need to send a follow-up email, I can do that. And that's been very helpful in terms of making sure that everything goes smoothly. All right, so we're still waiting for this to come through. Normally it goes a little bit quicker, but that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing very briefly. There we go. Okay, it just popped through. I'll share screen again. All right, so then this is what the consenter is gonna go ahead and see. They just see that it's been signed by the subject, and they're gonna go ahead and click on this link. And then if you can see that, it just pops up again with the same information, exactly when the test subject signed. And then here is where, in this case, I'm gonna put Rowan Staley. And I'm just gonna go ahead and add my signature to this fake test subject. Just save signature. This is also the area, by the way, with the subject where if we had any additional things we wanted them to fill out in the consent, like permission to contact in the future or anything that they needed to initial, it would all pop up in this ending section, and they would just initial at all of those different points. So they just go through this process. And then we can go ahead and close that survey. And then at this point, once everything is done on both sides, as Lynn says, it is going to go ahead and compile itself into a singular PDF. So you can see here, these are the three things that have been filled in. This one by the subject, the confirmation of consent by the investigator on the study. This little red bubble means that something else needs to be signed off on it. So I am going to go ahead and click on that. And here you can see that this is the compiled version. And so both the subject and the investigator get a copy of this in their files. This is what I will in the end print and also put in their study folder. So we have a printed section as well. And I've kept this kind of not an automatic because I like to make sure that this is uploaded correctly. But so in my case, I can go ahead and send that final email by clicking complete here. And then we're just gonna say save and go to next form. And so the final form is something that either I fill out or Dr. Quo and the person doing the consent process would fill out. And I found this to be very helpful. We obviously used to do this in paper and just added it to our study binder. But this just goes ahead and is making sure that everything went correctly. You can also add any specific comments if this subject had specific questions. You can confirm that you've given them a consent form. Everything was with IRB policy. In our case, we don't upload this to the subject's Epic. And then finally down here, you're just gonna insert the name of the person who is filling out this form. And this is either Dr. Quo or myself. And then finally, you just hit now, complete, save and exit form. So this is going to take us back to this home page of this subject. And as you can see, every single bubble has been filled in. And typically this is where I would sign out of the module and sign off with the patient. And you can see that at this point, they've gotten an email that just says this is a copy of your research consent form, and they can keep that for their own records. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, but I just want to say that I think this process of remote consent has been one of the biggest blessings for our study, at least to come out of COVID-19, because at least for us, it was one of our only in-person visits at the beginning that took place on campus at MGH. And I found making this remote ends up just being significantly easier to schedule for both our study doctor and for our subjects. They don't have to take the extra trip into the city if they're coming from far away. They're way more likely to be on time because they don't have to deal with parking at the main campus or finding the building. And overall, this, I would say the consent process just takes way less time than it used to when we were doing it in person. And so even after COVID-19 ends, my hope is that we'll go ahead and keep this a remote visit.
That's great. Yeah, that's how I feel too. I feel like transition to paperless and e-consent is the future direction of many studies after COVID. So it's very useful to share the insights you have here. Okay, so next, let's move on the last speaker, Kassandra Rowan, and she will introduce StudyTalks to us, another powerful tool. Okay, go ahead.
Is it presenting? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you need to go to the first slides and start present. Yeah.
There we go. So hi everyone, my name is Kassandra. I also work with Rowan in the Athinoula lab. I work in a different project. So like Ben said, I work in a migraine research study, but also at the Martinos Center. And I'm going to be reviewing StudyTalks. I do want to say that our study has also been really benefited by using the EConsent. So because we are an IND study, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, we do use both Redcap and StudyTalks. We were using Redcap for just a phone screen before, but now with the EConsent, it's been really easy. And I definitely suggest that you can mix and match depending on your study's requirements. Use some of Redcap if need be, or use some of StudyTalks if you need to. So I did want to go over a little bit more about this, and Lynn definitely knows more about Redcap than I do, so I'll try my best to be accurate. But obviously both are web-based tools to develop in databases and surveys. So StudyTalks can be used online similarly to Redcap. And so you go to the website and you're able to log in with your own username and password, similar to Redcap. You can customize it just like you can for Redcap. In fact, you can do it in a lot more ways because you actually can code it all yourself, which can be one of the cons of using StudyTalks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Obviously, StudyTalks is HIPAA compliant, just like Redcap. And StudyTalks has their own IT team that you can contact with any issues that you might have with using it. And you can also export data like you can for Redcap, either on Excel or any other methods you might use. One of the things about StudyTalks that I haven't seen in Redcap, because we use Redcap as well, is that you can actually run statistics and reports through StudyTalks with your raw data. So instead of having to export it, you can run, things like adverse event forms. If you want to see all your participants and you just want to run something for that, you can do it actually on the website. However, one of the cons, like I said before, is in order to make the actual questionnaires that you will be using to send participants, you do need to use HTML code. So you don't need to know, all of it and be super knowledgeable. You can get by with just a basic one, but Redcap is definitely more user-friendly. And so I definitely suggest using it first, unless your study is an IND. Another issue is that StudyTalks is not free. So the costs depends on what your project needs are. And you can also go to their website to find out more and if it would be applicable. Something else is that StudyTalks is Part 11 compliant for IND studies. and the whole thing is. So for example, like Lynn mentioned, the EConsent on REDCap is Part 11 compliant. But if you send questionnaires to participants and things like that, that's not Part 11 right now. And so it is the electronic database that you want to use if you have an IND. So I just wanted to go over mostly what StudyTalks looks like in terms of what you'll see when you go in. And so it's not as pretty looking as REDCap. I do have to say that. You know, I don't know what color scheme this is, but it's definitely not my favorite. So this is the login information right here. Obviously, you put in your username and password, and this is what your project dashboard is going to look like. The project dashboard is where you'll go in when you first log into StudyTalks. It's going to have the subjects within the little MGH where it says total right under there. That's where all of them are going to be listed. And the reason why I'm not showing a live demo is because a lot of the PHI is easily accessible, and I can't show that much if I were to go in and show it. But at the top, that blue bar, it says home, workbench, data sets. That's kind of like your main toolbar that you'll go in order to access the different areas of StudyTalks. So this is kind of like the main page, like I said. And then if you actually go into what a subject looks like, so this is your end of what you're looking when your subject is put into the database. And so you can go to their page versus REDCap is a little bit different. You don't have a portal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But when you have a subject in the study, they're going to have their own homepage, and they're going to have this, it kind of looks a little funky, but there's a little timeline at the bottom. And we just have a lot of different visits. I'm not going to go into too much depth about that, but you can see a timeline, all the visits that should happen in the timeline. You see test subject, so it's going to have their name. You can change their password and as well as their username. Their status is going to be there. You know, their screening is enrolled. And then the sidebar are some of the reports that we made. So for example, daily diary, some studies have participants complete diaries every day. That's something we do. We have an adverse event form. So we actually have our adverse events for subjects, at least, directly on this. So we don't have a paper copy. And medication can be stored on here too. And there's a huge database of medications that you can choose from. And you can also input your own. For example, they'll have pretty common medications, but they might not have the certain vitamin complex that your participant might be taking. So you can edit that how you want. And then I'm not going to go into too much about creating questionnaires on StudyTalks just because, like I said before, it does require a little bit of coding. And so in REDCap, if you're familiar with it, when you make the actual questionnaire, it kind of gives you, you know, what do you want your variable to be called? What do you want it to appear to the subject and whatnot? This, you have to actually go in and type a format. And it's a little complicated. If you guys are really interested, you can contact me later on if you're really getting stuck. But the IT team is really great there. So this is just an example of an adverse event form, kind of the back end of creating it. And this is what it looks like to the subject. So it's going to be a little bit more streamlined versus, I'm going to go back. It has like kind of weird numbers. It has like a code, a description. So that's not what the subject is going to see. They're going to see this preview page. And that's just a short example of one of the forms that I kind of showed you before on the subject page that the participants might be seeing. But now I'm going to talk more about the actual portal. So instead of having those questionnaires that you email participants on REDCap, when you have a participant and you put them into StudyTalks, they actually will be able to create their own username and password to access StudyTalks on their own end. And so what we were looking at before was our end, the study staff facing end, and this is what participants are going to see. And so this is where they access the questionnaires. They can change their payment information, their demographics. So you're not going to email them a questionnaire. It's going to pop up on their homepage. So such as this one. So this is an example of a participant homepage, and you see right, incomplete is a daily diary that is due now. And so they get a notification about that. And they know if it's ready or not. If they have the little yellow 0% means it's not done. You want them to all have the 100 green %. That's when you know it's done. And then it also shows them what's recently completed. So it looks like they completed a retreat session, which is another questionnaire that they have done. So it shows you what's upcoming, stuff that's due. And so it is possible to just not even email them, and they can just check their portal every day and see what questionnaires need to get done and what time. And then this is an example of one of the questionnaires, one of the diaries that they'll be completing on their portal. So it looks pretty plain. Like I said, StudyTalks is not, pretty looking. So it's just a white background and there's the questionnaire, and you can put whatever you want and you can make it look. So if you look however you want. And so if you are really good with coding, you can make this look so fancy and different colors. You can put designs in here. I don't have a background in that at all. So when I was making this, I just wanted the question to show up correctly. So this is, what it looks like. And then they also can edit their account information as well. So it really is amazing to have a portal for subjects to access, because then they have everything on their end that they can do, and you don't really need to worry about, I need to email them this questionnaire at this date or this questionnaire at this date. And they kind of keep it all neatly there, and you can access their same information, but just through our end. And so we can see questionnaires that they fill out. Maybe if they missed a question, we just log in through our account and go to their subject page on StudyTalks so we can see the data. So it's kind of cool to be able to check on them as well. So some important things to know about StudyTalks. I did kind of talk a little bit about it before, but like I said, it's Part 11 compliant. So for all aspects of it, we don't use StudyTalks for consenting. So I'm not really familiar with that, but I definitely recommend to use Redcap for the EConsent that they have. They do integrate study data collection with kind of other things. So not only can you use the site as data collection, but you can actually analyze some of that data. Probably not in the extent of using R or any other fancy software, but it definitely, if you know HTML, you can put some things in there and they can do, basic statistics. And another unique feature about StudyTalks is that participants can be enrolled and data shared across multiple studies. So basically what this means is that you can have a subject, and if they're in 2 studies on StudyTalks, they can share that information. So instead of being in 2 studies and having to complete the demographics and payment information, that stuff can be carried over to another study. This is something obviously that we aren't using at this point because it's just this participant for this study, but it's something that maybe you have multi-site studies to have 2 separate projects and then have the subject information be for both ones so you don't need to fill it out twice. It's a really interesting feature that I don't know so much about, but I would definitely suggest learning more. Obviously, it's HIPAA compliant, and they have a really great IT team as well. And then I'm just going to put these resources up here, their website that you can go to if you want to learn more about it, but all their information and how to set it up and how to run all the reports and how to create a questionnaire is on their wiki page. So they have a really great wiki page that they made and goes through all the different aspects. It has nice photos. It's really nicely organized and everything is written there. And it's kind of like a self questionnaire. So if you don't want to go and put in a ticket and ask, you can just go there and check. And obviously Partners has information written about StudyTalks as well if you just want to learn more on the Partners website. And I'm just gonna close there so we have time for questions.